Hey guys, Yips here, coming at you with another video, and today I want to talk a little bit about the new raid, Uldir. I have a talent guide for you guys in this video, as well as some tips and tricks that I have for each of the bosses, so I'll be showing that towards the end of this video on an Excel spreadsheet that will include the talent lists as well as the notes that I have for each of the bosses, just to help you guys improve a little bit. So yeah, let's just go over each and every one of the bosses. I'll tell you guys the tips and tricks that I have. Hopefully later this week I'll have some like footage from the new raid that I've had recorded that I'm happy with that I'll be able to share with you in order to kind of commentary over it and tell you guys exactly what I'm doing on each one of the bosses. But for now, I feel like letting you guys at least know what talents are acceptable on each and every one of the bosses, as well as, you know, what kind of tips and tricks that I've found the first week of going through this raid can maybe help you to do a little bit better for now. So first off, we have Talik. It's a pretty straightforward single target encounter. The talents that I'm running on this boss are just simply Death Bolt, Siphon Life, Phantom Singularity, Haunt, and Dark Soul Misery. The reason I'm running these talents is because it's simply my highest simming single target setup. But for the most part, that's what you're going to be using. In terms of relevant Azurate traits to use on this boss, Racking Brilliance, Sudden Onset are definitely excellent, so either one of those are totally fine, and running this talent setup will do fine for you. If you have more Sudden Onset traits, Writhe and Agony can be fairly powerful. However, Siphon Life is similar, so it's kind of, you know, pick and choose whichever one you want. The way you're going to maximize on this boss to kind of separate yourselves from other warlocks is on this boss there's a down phase. So you go down an elevator, and what ends up happening is when you go down the elevator there's ads spawning. The faster damage you can get on these ads, the more you're going to outpace the other warlocks, because the single target is kind of just what it is. There's not a whole lot of movement, there's not a lot going on, so it's just basically turreting like a target dummy. But when the ads spawn, you want to make sure you're extremely fast getting your Agony on them, getting your UA on them, making sure that you're sniping your UAs, in the sense that when the ag gets low, you make sure you have that unstable affliction on them, so you get the reset on the shard. But for the most part, it's a pretty straightforward boss. I don't want to spend too much time going over it because it's just so easy. So, for the second boss in the raid, we have Mother. This boss is a little bit more interesting because it has a lot of cooldown mechanics. Warlock is probably one of the stronger specs in the game for this particular boss because it has a damage modifier phase for pure single target, and Affliction Warlocks with their Dark Soul cooldown and with their Dark Glare, they're able to do a crazy amount of single target burst for that 100% phase when you get to the third platform. So the way that I've been playing this boss is, for the most part, I'm just turreting on the boss. I'm not the one to go over in the portals. Warlock is kind of useless hitting those ads. You want to send classes like Demon Hunters over there that are much more effective at doing fast cleave. But as an Affliction lock, just turret the boss. I use my cooldowns once on the opening platform, and then after that, I am saving everything. I'm saving my Dark Soul when it comes back up. I'm saving my Dark Glare as well. And what ends up happening is when you get onto that third platform, you have all your cooldowns available to you, and you're able to use them all at the same time with Bloodlust, and you're able to just do a crazy amount of DPS during that 100% damage ramp when she gets to her third platform. So the talents that I'm using is just the exact same thing: Death Bolt, Siphon, Phantom Singularity, Haunt, and Dark Soul Misery. It's really important that you make sure that you save your soul shards as well as your Haunt for when you get into that third platform. So like, you should be aware of when the last group is going to be going over and start preparing yourself a little bit ahead of time in order to make sure that you have the shards available to you as well as your Phantom Singularity cooldown available. So when you do transition over and press Bloodlust, everything's up, you don't have to be waiting, and you get max value on it. It's okay if you miss a few seconds on your Phantom Singularity, like you're not perfectly min-maxing it. It's okay if you don't perfectly min-max your UA usage. You want to make sure you have that stuff available for you for when you transition into that phase, so you're able to pump out a lot of DPS. Okay, so that's that boss. Next boss is going to be Fetid Devourer. Again, just a single target fight. However, that being said, if your guild isn't as strong on Fetid and you don't have super fast kill times, it can be kind of a good idea to talent into a lot of sudden onset traits and run Writhe and Agony over this base single target build. The reason being is Writhe and Agony is competitive and sometimes beats Siphon Life on single target, and having the additional utility as well to deal a lot of cleave onto the little blobs that spawn is very, very good. So if you can run Writhe and Agony with sudden onset traits and get a lot of pad cleave off on those ads that need to die, that can be really effective because Writhe and Agony is very good at 3-target cleaving. In terms of cooldown usage on this boss fight, it's going to depend on you and your kill times. I use my Dark Soul at the beginning of the encounter, and then at 50%, I'll have my Dark Soul and my Dark Glare up, and I'll use them together with Bloodlust when the boss has that 50% damage modifier. However, depending on your guild, depending on your push times, you may want to use Dark Glare in the opener as well if it's a little bit of a longer encounter, and then you'll have it up towards the end if you're going to get 2 uses out of it. But if you're only going to get 1, it can be beneficial just to save it all for that Bloodlust at 50% in order to stack all those CDs together and get a huge damage window off. This boss is extremely simple. Just get as much multi-target cleave on the blobs as you can when they spawn, and then after that you're just really saving your cooldowns for that 50% burn window. Okay, so next boss is going to be Zekvaz. So on Zekvaz, what you're going to want to be doing is quite a few different things because there's a lot of different adds that spawn in this fight in different variations, and knowing your cooldown usage is going to be very important on this boss because it's going to help you maximize your damage a lot more. So the thing that's really going to set you apart from other locks on this fight is going to be your Phantom Singularity usage. It has a really big role to play on this boss fight, as well as if you have sudden onset traits and can run Writhe and Agony. This is going to give you a huge boost of DPS if you can do these two things well, and I'll talk a little bit more in depth about what kind of stuff I'm talking about here. So Zekvaz has 2 different ad phases. It has an ad phase where it spawns 10 little guys, and then it has an ad phase where it spawns 3 big guys, but generally speaking you're only killing 1 of them. The reason running Writhe and Agony is good with sudden onset is because on the little guys and on the big guys, 2 target cleaving with Writhe and Agony is just better than Siphon Life. Not only that, it's important to make sure that you're saving your Phantom Singularity for all of these ad phases because you just gain double the value out of the talent from having those ads spawn. So for example, I have it in the notes on my Excel spreadsheet. The way that this boss kind of functions is you use your first Phantom Singularity at the start of the pull with your Dark Glare, with your Dark Soul, all of that, and then all of a sudden he'll spawn 10 of these ads, and generally speaking that will happen as soon as your Phantom Singularity comes off cooldown, roughly 45 seconds later. So you're going to be saving your second Phantom Singularity for those small ads, and make sure you wait for them to get stacked up on the boss to press that. While they're moving in and as they spawn, you want to be making sure that you're getting all of your Agony Zone on them, and as soon as they get under the boss, you're going to press that Phantom Singularity, cast a Seed of Corruption to spread your corruptions on all of them, and then put your Agonies out on all of them as well. This is going to give you a ton of spread cleave on them. It's going to give you a huge damage boost. It's also worth noting that Voidwalker does a substantial amount of AoE to them as well, so if you don't need the interrupts, that's another tool you could use to deal more DPS on this boss fight. And then after you transition out of that phase, I guess it is worth noting that if you do get the second set of ads there, you want to be delaying your second Phantom Singularity for those. After that, anyways, you're transitioning, you're going to get the 3 ads that are spawning. Just make sure you're efficiently 2-target cleaving them down. Obviously, in the last phase, if you can get that 100% damage buff at the end of the boss fight, it's very, very good. If you can't, just make sure you have your cooldowns available for when you guys are lusting. Generally speaking, my cooldown usage on this boss is I'm going to be using my Dark Soul and my Dark Glare at the start of the fight. I'm going to be using my Dark Soul and my Dark Glare partway through the fight separately, and then at the end of the fight at 6 minutes they'll come back up together and I'll use them in one big burst. So you're going to get 2 Dark Glares on this, or 3 Dark Glares on this fight, and you're also going to be getting 3 Dark Soul Miseries, so it's quite a good fight for Affliction in that regard. And yeah, these are the talents that I run on the fight, either this or with Writhe and Agony. I don't recommend playing AC for Zekvaz. So that kind of covers the first easy bosses of the raid. I would say that all these bosses are relatively simple on heroic difficulty. The next one we're going to be moving into is Zol. Zol is also a boss. Oh, I guess I missed Vectis, didn't I? Okay, let's talk about Vectis first before we move on to Zol. So Vectis, again, is just a straight up single target fight with 1 ad spawning every 20 seconds. If you want to delay your Phantom Singularity 5 or so seconds for when the ad is proccing to get that 2 target cleave off of it, that definitely would be worth it. However, I wouldn't wait too long to use your Phantom Singularity because it's going to end up clipping with the ad most of the time anyways. But just make sure you're doing good 2 target efficient cleave when that ad spawns, keeping your dots on them. Generally, the way that I play it is I'm focusing the boss and just off dotting the ad because it doesn't need to die that quickly, and I just cast a UA on the ad when it's about to die to get that shard refund. It is worth noting, if you're ever going to cast 2 UAs onto the boss, it's more efficient to cast 1 UA onto the boss and 1 UA onto the ad to get that efficient dot cleave. Aside from that, it's just a single target fight. Use your CDs in a proper manner and you should be just fine. So moving on to Zol. Like I said, Zol is a boss where you have a lot of talent options. Those talent options come in the level 30 row. For the most part, the rest of it stays very similar throughout the whole raid, but you can run Writhe and Agony or Absolute Corruption on this boss fight. I would recommend, if you're not as an experienced Warlock, play Absolute Corruption. It's going to make your life a lot easier. If you have sudden onset traits, however, Writhe and Agony can be extremely good on this boss fight, as the sudden onset and Writhe and Agony work in tandem together, and if you're able to keep Agony on 3 targets at a time at 15 stacks, that's an incredible amount of DPS, and it's definitely worth doing. Some things to note on this boss: make sure after your first Phantom Singularity, you're saving it for when the Krogs spawn. They line up pretty well together, so it's definitely worth to save it for that ad cleave. You can dot the ads as they're spawning. You don't have to wait for them to run into the middle of the room. So every time the Krogs are spawning on the outside, or every time one of the Hexers is spawning or whatever, I'm making sure I'm in a position to be able to dot that ad as soon as it becomes available to me in order to increase my overall DPS. In terms of UA spreading, make sure that you only cast 1 UA on 1 target at a time. That's even worth it if Deathbolt's off CD. It's just to spread around that 10% contagion debuff. And when an ad is going to be dying, make sure that you have a UA on it so you can get that shard refund. And for the most part, this boss is just maintain your agonies on the boss, maintaining your agonies on the ads that are spawning, your corruptions as well, and then keeping your Phantom Singularity cooldown at good times when the ads are stacked together. Not too difficult of a boss fight once you transition into the last 50%. It just turns into a single target burn. Make sure you have your cooldowns up for Lust. Outside of that, try to figure out the timings that work best for you, but make sure you're getting efficient use out of all of them together. The next boss is going to be Mithrax. Mithrax is a relatively difficult boss for most guilds on heroic difficulty, and Warlock has a really good way of cheesing this fight by running Absolute Corruption. So a lot of the mind-flaying ads on this boss fight, people aren't very good at dealing with them. They're spread out all over the place, and it's kind of a dream for a Warlock because you can just run around in circles and put Absolute Corruption on them extremely easily and gain a lot of DPS that way. It's not too much of a DPS loss on single target to run Absolute Corruption, however, it is a huge gain when all of those ads are available to you and you don't have to spend the globals redonning them all the time. I try my best to keep as many agonies out as possible, but I'm focusing on getting corruption on all of those little ads when they're spawning. For the most part, other than that, it's just a single target boss encounter. Just, play it like you normally would. But when those when the ads that spawn Mindflay become available to you, make sure that you're corruptioning them. Make sure that you're agonying them. Use your Phantom Singularity wisely on this boss. If there's a lot of those Mindflay ads stacked up, use it on the one most central. If not, just be using it on cooldown on the boss or the 2 cleave ads that you need to be killing. The most important part of this boss, again, is going to be positioning yourself towards the center of the room in order to get as many corruptions out as possible on all of these ads, as well as being able to hit both of the mini bosses that he spawns in the down phase at the same time. Very good Affliction boss. Definitely highly recommend that you play Absolute Corruption on it, as well as all the other talents I have listed here. For the last boss, for the Worm Boy. So Worm Boy, your damage in phase 1 doesn't really matter. That's the phase with all the ads. But for the most part, you're going to be running a Absolute Corruption talent if you're cheesing it. The cheese is just when you go and stand up on the platform, you're running Inevitable Demise, you keep a lot of corruptions out, and you just have Drain Soul all the time. Or sorry, Drain Life for a lot of damage. However, that being said, if you're not doing the cheese strat, Writhe and Agony or Siphon Life can be very good, just because it's all going to come down to your single target DPS on Jihun himself. So whether you're running Writhe or Siphon Life depends on whether or not you have sudden onset traits or not. But either way, it's just going to be a single target burn phase. After you use your cooldowns, your Dark Glare and your Dark Soul in phase 1, do not use Dark Glare again until the 100% damage amp. However, use Dark Soul Misery as soon as the boss spawns and it comes off cooldown. It will be back up again for the 100% burn. After the 100% burn, it's just going to be the last 20% of the fight. Use your cooldowns as they come back up and keep a good single target rotation. So now I'm going to be showing you guys the Excel spreadsheet we have here. I'll link this in the description below so you can just click on it. Maybe just, if you're wondering what to run on a boss fight or you're wondering some tips and tricks, this will be something for you guys to go and look at. Just has the bosses listed here, the talents I recommend. There's a little, sub thing here that says if you have sudden onset, Writhe and Agony can be very good on all of the bosses. And then here it just has a few noted tips and tricks on the bosses that I feel like it's relevant to talk about. So thanks for watching. Hopefully this gives you guys some good insight on the bosses. Hopefully I'll have videos that are concrete and show me playing on the boss, and I'll talk over it, and you guys can really, get into my head and understand what I'm doing on them. Anyways, best of luck in your heroic weeks. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you guys later.